Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander Horat. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. He's a researcher and author known for his work examining geopolitics, financial power structures, and the deepest forces that shape global events. Hello, Joseph. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Alexander.
So, we've seen a lot of big things happen since we last talked, namely the war with Iran, which is pretty big news in my opinion.
Yeah,
Oil is over $115 a barrel. We're seeing gasoline go up.
yeah.
So, I have to ask you, is this the beginning of Armageddon?
Well, that's quite a statement. Uh, in my opinion, Iran, this whole thing in Iran, which I'm against, but now that we're in it, we need to finish it and get it done and get out of there. Um, my whole problem with and I'm taking a long time to answer your question because it's very complex. My problem with what I'm seeing going on, number one, is it looks to me like America has been more or less colonized by the state of Israel. I don't think that uh, had there not been the extensive influence of that country over American politics, that we would be doing this. But the other thing that concerns me is I don't see any clear exit strategy. And what do I mean by that is that if you look at the way this air campaign has been waged by the American Air Force and the Israeli defense forces, if you look at the way it's been waged, they are so quickly decapitating. In fact, I was just watching another podcaster talking about the new supreme leader, Moshe al Khamenei, the second oldest son of the previous supreme leader that died in a previous attack. Well, apparently, after he was announced as the new supreme leader, no one has seen him.
Hmm.
And the Iranian state radio is using a particular term in the Farsi language that indicates that he may have suffered some sort of attack or may already be dead.
Wow.
Which brings me back to my point. If you're going to try to force a regime to change its policies or to force a regime change, period, you have to have somebody left to negotiate with. And this is what I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing a clear exit strategy here, and that bothers me because the longer this goes on, and the other thing I need to mention here is let's assume, Alexander, that the United States and Israel are successful, whatever that means. The other thing that disturbs me is we have no clearly defined objective as to what we want other than Mr. Trump's recent statement, well, unconditional surrender. Well, okay, even that has to be spelled out. There are always terms specifically as what that means, and we're not hearing anything specific. The long-term problem, let's say that we accomplish whatever objectives that they have in mind to accomplish with this operation. The other problem I have is all of these analysts out there, Alex, that are saying, well, getting rid of the Iranian Islamist regime means that the Abraham Accords will go forward and everything will be rosy in the Middle East. They forget that the other major Islamic power in that region of the world, in fact, there are three: Israel, Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And if you look at that ideology, Islam, we know that there was heavy Saudi influence during the 9/11 attacks. So, in other words, we might be just exchanging one bad regime for another pair of bad actors on the world stage. So, in other words, the Islamic world, whether we like it or not, is not our friend. That's the problem. And I can't be any more blunt than that. Now, regarding Armageddon, the there is a theological system that is tremendously influential within this country known as dispensationalism. And in that theological system, number one, the Old Testament blessings and cursings do apply to the current state of Israel. They do not apply to Christ. Unfortunately, the traditional Christian view is that they apply to Christ and the church. It has nothing to do with the politics or the nation state of Israel. I do suspect that there is a heavy theological component to what's going on that is linked to the state of Israel, number one, but it also is coming out of a certain segment of American evangelical Christianity that's also driving this whole quest to create a situation where they get to rebuild the temple and proclaim the coming of Messiah, whoever they decide to anoint for that purpose, and everything is going to be rosy. Well, on the traditional Christian view, that's actually the beginning of the end. Okay. So I look at all of this, Alexander, with a considerably more jaundiced and skeptical eye than a lot of the alternative press in this country. I don't know how else to put it. I was against this action, but now that it started, let's finish it. But let's spell out some clear objectives as to when and how we're going to get out of there. And this is what bothers me. We've been down this road before. I've seen it since I was a boy with Lyndon Johnson getting us involved in Vietnam. There was no clear exit strategy. There was no clear set of conditions for victory. It was just send a bunch of American kids over there to die in the jungles of Vietnam, ad infinitum. And it ended up driving him out of office. So I'm saying the same thing all over again.
Yeah, so I guess my next question is what do you think of the concept of Greater Israel? And do you think there's actors who are pushing for that on the world stage right now?
I definitely think there are actors pushing for that. The concept itself is a particular way of reading some of the biblical passages. But again, for the Christian, the third temple is literally Christ, his resurrected body, and by extension, the church. So it's got nothing to do with a political system or a political state. That's the problem. The other problem is the the current population of Israel is predominantly Ashkenazim Jews.
Hmm.
And if you know anything about Jewish history, there are basically two different populations. There are the Sephardim Jews that dispersed after the Roman conquest of Palestine, approximately 70 AD to 72 during that whole period. And they dispersed themselves throughout Europe. And that population is, by and large, a population that is at least racially linked to the original population that was there. The Ashkenazim, on the other hand, are people that converted to Judaism about, let's give a period of, let's say, 800 to 1200 AD, and that a long process of conversion of people in Khazaria, the Khazars that became the Ashkenazim population. Well, those Jews are predominantly the population that's there. So the question arises, do those covenantal uh, Old Testament prophecies and covenants apply to that population or the original population? And in either way that you answer that, the other problem is how do you take something that was promised, 2,000 years or much more than that, actually, years ago, and apply it to the modern world when, in fact, you've got Arab populations that by and large occupy that region? You're just going to go in there and push them all out? Are you going to go in there and do some sort of mass, deportation and resettlement, a la the Syrian kings of of the Old Testament. Is that what you're going to do? So the whole thing is, to me, it's just kind of nuts. And what scares me, Alex, is our current ambassador to Israel. Oops. Our current ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, he's one of these evangelo Zionist, uh, dispensationalist Christian types. And if you saw his interview with Tucker Carlson, oh yeah, Greater Israel, that's in the Bible, so that land is theirs. Well, tell that tell that to the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Lebanese and the Iraqis and the Kurds and the Turks that live in the area, that supposedly is going to fall under Greater Israel, and you've got all the tailor making hallmarks of a major war. So it's to me it's lunacy, and this guy is an ambassador. You know, you the last thing you do, Alex, is announce to the very people in the region that you are supposed to be the ambassador to. The last thing you do is, oh, by the way, uh, we're backing Israel conquering all of you people, and do it on public record on television for anybody to read. It just boggles the mind. It's like the statement that our ambassador to India apparently just made to the people in India, that the United States will never tolerate India becoming a major economic competitor of the United States. Well, that whether that's true or not, you don't make a policy announcement like that to the very people that are the subject of the announcement. It just boggles my mind.
Yeah, I agree with negotiations. It doesn't really make any sense. Like
No,
you
of course
said,
not.
you don't tell somebody you're going to kill them all anywhere, move them off their land, and with the Greater
Yeah.
Israel, and then try to negotiate with them. And also, when
Yeah.
when we mentioned negotiations again, we were in negotiations with Iran over its nuclear weapon thing. So
Mhm.
basically, they just killed the leader during negotiations. So I guess the question is, who does that leave to negotiate with after you kill their leader with an airstrike?
Well, this is my problem. It goes back to what I said when we started the interview. You've got to have an exit strategy, and if your purpose is to either have a regime change or to change the politics of a current regime, if it's the latter, you have to have somebody to negotiate with. And the problem, as far as I can see, is they have been so successful in the air campaign that they have so fragmented that regime. We've got the Iranian president saying one thing, and the Council of Experts and supreme leaders saying something else entirely. And to add confusion to all of this, you've got the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi that is saying, "Yeah, I'm ready to go in and take over transition government." Well, wait a minute here. Who recognized him and made him the transitional government of Iran? You see the Iranian population shouting, Javid Shah, long live the Shah, in some of these demonstrations, but that doesn't necessarily mean the entire Iranian population wants a return of the Shah. So it's a mess. It's another mess.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And yeah, we don't know if it was a minority saying "Long live the Shah" or a majority. Like we don't know.
Precisely.
I guess it's pretty impossible right now to conduct a survey in that country, though. But
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it. No.
yeah, yeah. So that leads me to my next question. So many analysts say a war with Iran would not remain a regional conflict. Do you see a potential Iran war escalating into a much larger geopolitical confrontation involving Russia or China?
It could easily do that. The interesting thing here is, if you step back from all of the bile that's floating out there with this war, and look at it from a much wider geopolitical context, it's very clear what at least the deep state backers of Mr. Trump are really trying to do. The first thing they did in this major operation is they took out President Maduro in Venezuela. They have put enough pressure on the Venezuelan government that for the first time diplomatic relations are restored between the two countries, and I think what 16 or 17 years, something like that. Which means that the United States is in a position, and the other thing is it's in the process of kicking China and Russia out of that country.
Mm,
So, in other words, it's about oil. It's about Venezuela's oil, and it's about crippling China. Then the other thing that the Trump administration has been doing that it has been very clever and no one paid it much attention, and that's the constant encouragement of some of the Canadian provinces that are disgusted with the policies coming out of their federal government in Ottawa to secede from the Canadian Union. And the interesting thing is the Canadian Supreme Court has already gone on record and said that yeah, they do have that right. So Trump is encouraging Manitoba and Alberta to secede from the Canadian Union, largely because of what? Well, again, Alberta has the oil in Canada, and it's Alberta's provincial economy that is funding the policies of the Ottawa government that Albertans, mostly conservative sorts of people, don't like. So that's the other thing. So the fourth thing that Trump has done is he's made all those overtures to Denmark, and quite frankly, some of them I would interpret to be kind of barely disguised threats. That we want Greenland, we want that position strategically, we want the minerals that are there, and so on. And fifthly, and this is I know I'm painting a long, complicated picture, but fifthly, the operation against Venezuela is also directed against the other thorn in this hemisphere, namely Cuba.
mm,
And then sixthly, he's gone to Mexico and says, "You clean up the cartels, or we will."
yeah.
Okay. So, in other words, what Trump is doing, if you look at it from that perspective, is he is trying to secure and reassert the American hegemon in the North American region, and by extension on into South America. And while all this is going on, that's the context in which you have to look at Iran. Because what he's doing in Iran, from that geopolitical perspective, is he's severing China's Belt and Road Initiative, that much of it flows through Iran. He has also taken direct aim. I just blogged about this today. He's taken direct aim at British City of London insurers of international shipping traffic that don't want to take out insurance policies on ships coming in or out of the Straits of Hormuz, because they can't afford the exposure to that risk. So, what did Mr. Trump do? He announced that the United States government would insure those ships. So, in other words, he has basically come right out and said, okay, Lloyd's of London, you don't want to insure the ships. We're taking over that part of the market from you.
Mm,
So, in other words, and again, it's in a certain sense, it's very cunning and clever because if you look at what's happening in Great Britain, it's being Islamicized by all the migrants. So, do you want to turn over the control of and arbitrage of major international underwriters like Lloyd's of London to Sharia courts? No, that ain't going to happen. And so you see the United States making a major play for a major stake in the international insurance and shipping underwriting market. So all of this is targeting China, which incidentally, the world has just learned that the Chinese air defense system that they gave to Iran really isn't all that good because it doesn't seem to be shooting down very much. So again, that's going to hurt China. So final the final long-term piece in all of this is, okay, say all of this is successful. Trump waves his magic wand and is able to install a completely puppet America friendly regime in Tehran, and the oil starts flowing again. What that does, and this is crucial to understand, because this is like watching all the geopolitical dominoes fall. What that does is it makes the price of oil plummet from where it is now, because all that risk of a radical Islamic regime in control of that oil is gone. And when the price of oil drops, who gets hurt the most? Russia.
Yeah.
So, in other words, you're watching a very cleverly designed string of dominoes all coming together. But the linchpin is Iran. You've got to be successful there. If you're not, you've just demonstrated to the world that once again, the American military is incapable of winning a war. And by winning, I mean forcing American will on a permanent solution to a foreign government. That's the problem. So, he started this, now he's in it, and he's got to be successful. He's got to be.
Yeah, so I guess my next question is in relation to China again. So I think China gets roughly 20% of its oil from Iran. And
Something like that.
one of the big reasons why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor was because they
Was
were
oil.
cut off from its oil. So
Right.
I'm just wondering if we might see a repeat in history. Do you think there's any chance China would send boots on the ground to Iran, or do you think they'll just mainly just give
No,
weapons to them?
no. The problem now for China, and again, I'm guessing, but if you've been following what's going on inside of China, there has, within the last few weeks, there has been apparently a major party struggle inside the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party
Hmm.
between Mr. Xi and several senior Chinese generals, many of whom he has sacked, and they have not been seen since.
Uh,
The other thing that happened as a consequence of those sackings is some of the regional generals have made a let's just put it this, made a calculated point to have military parades. And it's unknown whether this is in response to the sacking as support for Mr. Xi or as a warning, you can only go so far and then you're going to tangle with us. So, in other words, the current regime in China is very shaky. And that is part of the timing, I think, of this operation, because that purge inside of China started before the Iranian operation by about 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So they very carefully calculated and timed this operation, not only with politics and other indicators in the West, but they've also timed it very carefully to what's going on inside of China right now. The Chinese regime is, Mr. Xi launched a purge,
mm,
and anytime you launch a purge, you weaken your regime for a short to middle period of time before you can rebuild the infrastructure that you've just purged. Just remember what happened in 1933 and then again in 1936 inside of the Soviet Union with Stalin's purges of the Red Army. By the time Stalin was done, he had he had literally liquidated and executed hundreds of Soviet generals. And many of those generals came out of World War One and or the Russian Civil War and had actual combat military experience.
mm.
So he gets rid of that talent pool, including a very brilliant Russian general by the name of Marshal. Uh, oh, now I would forget his name. Mikhail Tukhachevsky. He gets rid of Marshal Tukhachevsky, who basically, if you study the man, everybody gives credit to the Germans for inventing modern warfare. Well, there's a Russian inventor of it too, and his name is Marshal Tukhachevsky. Um, the the result of those purges, Alex, was when Hitler invaded in 1941. The leadership of the Red Army is, if you look at the way it responded to the invasion, I mean, you couldn't have had a better enemy to fight than the Red Army in 1941. It took 2 months and 60% of it is gone, and Hitler thought, oh, I've got it made, so I'm going to send a bunch of soldiers home on leave. That didn't work out too well, but in other words, Stalin literally created the conditions that led to those early German successes in that campaign, and China's doing the same thing. So is China going to launch an invasion of Taiwan when its oil pipeline is no longer secure, and the Israelis and Americans are bombing the daylights out of Iranian oil production? No, they ain't going to do it.
Yeah, and I don't think Taiwan has any extra oil that China can get from them
No,
for.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. And the other thing that China has done that, in a certain sense, is colossally stupid is, it built that monster of a dam at the Three Gorges Dam. I don't know if you've ever seen
Oh
pictures
yeah,
of it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just enormous. But th- what they did is they built a big bullseye on a target. So all Taiwan has to do is, okay, you want to invade us? We're going to take out the Three Gorges Dam. And you do that, and you are literally subjecting tens of millions of people to flooding. You are taking out a sizable portion of the Chinese power grid. You are creating other major supply line and infrastructure disruptions. So again, China, everybody's so afraid of China, and I'm thinking, no, there's no reason to be.
Right. So yeah, it seems like this Iran war is definitely what's on the news right now,
Yeah,
but what's not really being talked about is the Russian-Ukrainian war. So I was just wondering
right.
if you had an update for the viewers on how that's going and if you think that's going to end anytime soon, or is that going to keep dragging on for more years?
Well, if I'm torn by that war because, being Eastern Orthodox, I don't like to see Russians and Ukrainians fighting each other. I understand the historical reasons and why they don't like each other. Uh, I understand it very well. But what I've been hoping, largely forlornly, is that number one, the Ukrainians would wake up and realize that the West has used them, and in the process of doing so, abused them, their culture and their people, in a proxy war that they cannot hope to win. They just can't. The only thing that they're doing is they're bleeding their own population. The Ukraine began this war with a population of about 20 million, and they are losing population so fast they're simply leaving the country. They don't want to get drafted to fight a war that they know they can't win. And Russia's just content to grind on, you know.
Yeah.
The other problem is I'm hoping the Ukrainians will wake up and realize that the European Union, so to speak, uh, has been playing them every bit as badly as America has, and precisely again for the purpose of trying to wage this war against Russia. The ultimate objective of the West since the turn of the last century, with the British and people like Sir Halford Mackinder, the geopolitician, the ultimate goal of the West has always been to break up that enormous landmass that constitutes the Russian nation and break it apart into smaller, more manageable countries. And this Ukrainian proxy war has been designed to do precisely that. I don't see I don't see any end to that. However, again, with what's going on in Iran, if that situation changes, it will definitely change the geopolitical calculus of what's going on with the Ukraine. Um, there's a small indicator that Russia may have already done the recalculation of the geopolitical calculus in that a couple of weeks, pardon me, days ago, when this whole operation began, and it was apparent that the decapitation of the Iranian leadership was working, there were rumors pretty much everywhere, and in some fairly reliable places on for journalistic sources, that the supreme leader Ali Khamenei was preparing to ditch the country and fly to Moscow into exile along with his personal fortune. That story, I think, may have been a little indicator that Russia recalculated because he did not do that after it was so firmly being announced. So my suspicion is he wanted to flee the country along with his son and family and personal fortune and belongings, and Russia said no.
Mm.
That's my suspicion. Now the Russians are never going to admit it, but if they did the kind of calculus I think they did, what they are afraid of is importing someone like that could be a firebrand to their own internal Muslim population. That whole war with Chechnya that Russia had to wage was for these reasons and purposes. So I'm terribly suspicious that Russia has publicly been saying, "Oh yeah, we support Iran. They're our ally. They're our friend. We get our drones from them." And privately, they've been saying, "No, you can't come here." So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Ukraine. I'm not optimistic, Alex, that it's going to end anytime soon.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you, so we saw Russia, like they've been able to take territory in Ukraine, but they haven't been able to defeat Ukraine. And I think you
Right.
said Ukraine has around 20 million people. So I
Let
guess
let me let me may I stop you?
yes.
Uh, Proper English. I know I'm a curmudgeon on this. Proper English is it's the Ukraine.
Okay.
I know everybody says Ukraine, but you know why they did that? Because the government of the Ukraine says to us, this is the way your language should work because it makes us feel incompetent and like we're not a country. But proper English is it is the Ukraine, just like it's the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, the United States. That's the way I was trained as a boy.
Oh no, that's
That
okay. Thanks for
that's the
correcting me.
that's no, no, it's not meant to be anything other than just to kind of inform you that there was a little agenda going on.
Mm.
I refuse to surrender sovereignty over our own language to another country.
No, I understand. I definitely understand. So the Ukraine, so do you think the Ukraine is a harder or easier country to invade compared to Iran?
Oh, much easier. That I mean, if I don't know if you've seen a topographical map of Iran, it's a nightmare to invade. It is an absolute nightmare because most of the country is mountainous. It's mountainous desert, to be quite frank with you. And it's a very large country. People don't realize how large Iran actually is, but it's a very large country. I think 17th or something like that out of the 200 or so countries on the face of the planet. So it's very sizable. The other part of the problem is that the population in Iran is uh, it is not a homogenous population. In other words, there are different ethnic groups inside of Iran besides just the Persians. So that's the other part of the problem. Uh, Troops on the ground for an invasion. I know Mr. Trump is mouthing off on this, but the reality, the mathematics, um, militarily, it's just nutty to assume that we would put boots on the ground, in spite of what Mr. Trump is saying. Now, what that means is, if Mr. Trump does opt for a ground invasion of Iran, personally, I think it's the nuttiest thing he could possibly do.
Hmm.
If the only circumstances I could conceive where that would be militarily feasible is if a government was formed in Tehran and it announced that the old regime is gone, we're in charge, and it gave proof of being in charge. And if that government was able to stabilize the country, then and only then, if that government invited American forces into the country, would I think that that would be an alternative that you could at least consider. But invading it, um, my guess, Alex, is that we would probably need about at least and this is a very liberal estimate, at least 100,000 men to do it,
Hmm.
if not much more. And the reality would be much more. The Ukraine, on the other hand, is part of that great northern European plain. So the territory in the Ukraine is, it's very flat. Um, for the most part, it's that very rich black loam soil in the Ukraine, which turns to mud every spring. So that part of invading the Ukraine is difficult. So you always have to wait for the weather to dry the ground so that you can conduct operations. But it's a comparative cakewalk compared to what Iran is. That's why nobody invades Iran. you know,
So do
it's
we
just
know how many troops Russia has sent to Ukraine so far?
to the Ukraine.
To the Ukraine, yes.
It's going to take time, but I'm a stickler for it. Otherwise, take the definite article out of the United States, out of the Netherlands, out of the United, and just say United Kingdom, or just say Netherlands.
Yeah.
It grates on the ears to those of us who remember the proper English. And when the Ukrainian government told us, "Oh, you got to drop your definite article," well, the other part of the thing that they're not telling you is Slavic languages don't have a definite article.
Hmm.
So we're supposed to turn English into a Slavic language. No, sorry, it ain't gonna happen. But anyway, I have heard figures for the Russian operation that have varied so much since it started. Initially, I heard figures of about 250,000 people. Then there was that major buildup during the first major Russian offensive to somewhere around 600,000. Um, I think that was the Western press overestimating things again. Um, if the Russians wanted to, yeah, they could easily raise an enormous army and just say enough is enough. We're going all the way. We're taking over Kiev and so on and so forth. The problem that has always daunted the Russian operation is they don't want to occupy the Ukraine. And the reason they don't want to occupy the Ukraine is precisely because of the history between the two peoples.
Hmm.
They're very familiar with it. And they know that a Russian occupation would be a headache, especially to a Ukrainian people that have recently been free and independent. So their problem is exactly the same as the United States. They've got a regime that is propped up and being held into power by the West. It is not a popular regime. if they can get somebody in there with whom to negotiate, they would end it just like that.
Mm.
And by the way, it's interesting because they, after this Iranian operation, the Russians suddenly signaled to the West, and this is the other part of the story that doesn't seem to be getting talked about enough. The Russians suddenly signaled to the West, EMS to Mr. Trump, that, oh, well, we might be able to drop that no security guarantee from the West requirement. We might be able to drop that. Now, that's huge. That's huge. That's saying, okay, one of our major platforms we're taking off the table. We need to get out of this war, and we're willing to finagle that point. Um, so far, I haven't heard anybody take them up on it. That alarms me.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully we can find peace there soon. That would be a good thing, I think. But
Yeah, I agree.
going back to Iran, so how long do you think this war between the United States and Iran is going to take?
Um, Frankly, right now I don't know. Um, it's too soon to tell. However, I am not at this point in time. It may change tomorrow, but at this point in time, I'm not optimistic for all the reasons I just outlined. Um, they haven't really figured out who they want to negotiate with. And now Mr. Trump has come out and said unconditional surrender. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, you're talking to a country that predates Christ, and the history of that people and of that country. I mean, it's very old. It is very rich. It is very diverse. It stands halfway between the Western world and the Far East. So it's a very peculiar and unusual culture. So I don't know what Mr. Trump has in mind. At this point, I'm tired of trying to figure out what's inside of his head, and more importantly, I'm tired of trying to figure out what's inside of the head of his advisors. I don't think he's getting very good advice at all right now. So what's in his mind? Then add to the other factor I mentioned, and that's the disproportionate influence of Israel over American policy. I have not a clue what is in Bibi Netanyahu's head, as I like to call him, but he is such an extraordinarily shifty and, in my opinion, totally underhanded man. Um, we're talking about someone that within a matter of hours of Charlie Kirk's assassination comes out and said, "Well, Israel had nothing to do with it." At the time, no one was even thinking about Israel having had anything to do with it. So why do you announce the fact?
Wow.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's it just kind of boggles the mind. So I have, again, I don't know what's going on in Bibi Netanyahu's head, or what he's telling President Trump, or what President Trump is telling him, or what their advisors are saying to each other. Um, just color me skeptical on this one, Alex. I don't know. I don't know how to answer it. I have this sinking feeling, to be quite honest with you. I don't know how familiar you are with the history of World War One and the run up to it, but Chancellor von Bismarck was asked what will start the next major war, and his comment was, "Well, some damned fool thing in the Balkans," and he turned out to be right.
Yeah.
And that war, which was supposed to be, Austria-Hungary versus Serbia. Well, we know who's going to win that one, but the problem was no one was thinking, certainly not Austria-Hungary, that Russia was going to mobilize. And because Russia is going to mobilize, France is going to mobilize. And because France is mobilizing, Germany has to mobilize, So the dominoes fell rather quickly, and bang, we're in a world war, you know. I get the sinking feeling that we may have lit a fuse over there. I hope not. Again, I'm not. Once you're in something, I hope our arms are successful. How can you not? But was this a well considered policy decision? I don't think so. Um, I just get the feeling that this could drag on and get way, way out of kilter real fast. And here's the bad news: there are a lot of people that, and I understand the reasons why, and many of those reasons are my own reasons. There are a lot of people that are taking umbrage and offense and are really calling into question the wisdom of Mr. Trump's decision to do this. And I'm certainly one of them. The bad news is that Mr. Trump is the voice of moderation in this regime. If it were up to people like Senator Lindsey Graham or some others that we've seen inside the halls of power in Washington, things would be very much worse than they are right now. So where this is going to go, all I can tell you, Alex, is at this point in time, I'm not optimistic. I can easily see it uh, spiraling out of control as we speak. As we speak, look at the escalation since this started. Just look at what has happened. We started out by saying, well, we're out for decapitation and regime change. Then the targets shifted to infrastructure, communications. Now the targets have shifted again to Iran's oil production. I mean, that's its source of income. So the the goalposts keep moving, and they tell us that, well, now we're into phase two of the operation. Okay, I can understand why you don't want to reveal details of a military operation or its phases. But can you at least tell us how many phases are there? You
Mm.
know, if we're in phase two, is there a phase three, four, or five? How many? And could we maybe get kind of a general idea of what the objectives of each phase are? That's part of military planning. This unit has to be at this point by such and such a time in the campaign. Um, how they get there, that's up to the commanding officer. But I haven't seen any indication of that. So again, we're at the mercy of the politicians and the generals.
Yeah, so for my next question, we see that they killed the Ayatollah and he was the supreme leader for most of the Shiite Muslims, which are a
Mhm.
large minority of Muslims. So I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, do you think any Shiite majority countries will come to the aid of them, or any Sunni Muslims come to any aid, or do you think they'll largely just stay out of the conflict in
Well,
the United
the
States?
the Sunni Muslims are, the countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and so on. They are not friendly towards the Iranian regime at all. So I don't expect any sort of aid is going to come from them.
Mm.
Um, you might get some sort of response from Turkey, but I doubt it. Um, Egypt, no. I think what the rest of the Muslim world is doing is they're waiting to see how this is all going to go,
Yeah.
and then they'll make their real long term commitment. Um, they've already been served notice that China is not a an effective military partner because their technology is not working as billed. And they've also learned that it's a very weak and ineffectual ally. In other words, we're going back to the timing of all this with what's going on inside the Chinese Politburo. Um, I don't see them doing anything. However, as I said when you asked the first question, if we are successful in toppling that regime, what that does is it boots up other Islamic nations to speak for the Islamic world, like Saudi Arabia. What an open and wonderful society that is. Or like Turkey. And again, these we have to get it through our thick Western heads. Islam is so utterly contradictory to basic Western culture and our values that have been evolving as part of this culture for at least 2 millennia. It is very contradictory to that. So we may get short to middle term allies out of this, but in the long term, that's a much more difficult thing to suss out.
Yeah, so as long as this war continues, do you forecast the price of oil continuing to go up?
Um, if the war continues, it will go up. But as a consequence of going up, let's assume the war bogs down into a quagmire, a stalemate. Pardon me, my sinuses are off the charts today. Let's assume that you get involved in a kind of stalemate situation, like World War One. Everything just bogs down. People shoot at each other, but they don't get anywhere. Um, the the result of that will be that Iran will no longer be a stable, reliable source of oil. The price will go up. But as a consequence of the price going up, other oil fields, which are now uneconomical or unproductive, will become economical to operate. So they'll open up. Other new sources of oil will be developed and the price will drop. So what this really does is it is the longer this goes on, the more other sources of oil are developed, and the more any future share of the oil market that Iran may get back into once its situation is straightened out will be less than it is now.
Hmm.
So, in other words, the long term game for this regime, if it manages to stay in power, is not looking too good. And the other problem that they have is I'm just talking about the oil infrastructure, but you've also got the delivery supply chain. And if America is injecting itself now into the international insurance shipping underwriting business, as Mr. Trump says he intends to do, then does Iran then have to shop around for other insurance underwriters to ship its oil? Probably so. And in the process of that shopping and taking on an underwriter that's not a major political power, they're going to have to pay higher premiums on that insurance. So they are really in a mess. We are too. I'm not saying we're not, but so are they.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it. So I like to take the time to share Joseph's website, the Giza Death Star. It has a lot of great information, a lot of great posts. And would you like to tell the viewers how they can join and become a member?
They can just go to that website, and as they scroll down, there is a little tab. I don't remember exactly where it is, where they can go and uh, sign up for membership. and yeah, it's down there somewhere. Member logins and so on and so forth. Create account. That's where they can, or cancel membership. That's all under the account tab there. But yeah, they can go there and join up. We have a lot of fun on the website.
Yeah, and you definitely have a lot of great books that you've written. Uh, are you working on a new book right now?
Yes and no. I'm not actually writing a book. I'm in the process of researching one that may or may not turn into a book.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to describe what stage I'm in
Yeah, so out of all your books, what would be your number one recommendation for people watching the video?
right now. Well, any of them. I think the ones that right now they would need to concentrate on are uh, the Nazi series books. Apocalypse Theater would certainly be one. The Conspiracy to Kill Kennedy. Those would be the ones I would recommend to start with. People that read my books will find they're all interlocked and interrelated. I know that sounds kind of nutty, but they are. But there you go.
And the great thing is that you can buy them on Amazon, so that's
Yeah,
definitely easy for most people. Most people have an Amazon account, I think, nowadays.
yeah. If they buy books off of my website, the website will take them to Amazon, and Amazon will fill the order. But if they buy off of my website, Amazon will give me a little extra royalty.
Okay.
So I always ask people to please buy. You're going to end up buying them from Amazon, but if they buy them by linking from my website, Amazon gives me a few pennies extra. And in this business, you don't get very rich writing books, so I can use all the extra pennies I can get.
Oh no, I definitely agree, and I think everyone should definitely buy Joseph's books. They have a lot of great information, I think. Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to share in this video, Joseph?
Nope, that'll do it. If you're good, I'm good.
Well, I have to say, I really appreciate you coming back on the show and providing all this great insight on all this information, and definitely would like to have you on the show again soon.
Sure. Thanks for having me back, Alex.
I'd like to thank the viewers for watching, so please subscribe and share this video with all your friends so it can get out to as many people as possible. And please buy one of Joseph's books and check out his website. And thank you all for watching. Hope you have a good day.